to Daily Hindu News Analysis. Now, before we begin our discuss, we will see that UPSC IAS is the channel name that was changed from Future IAS, no reading, only understanding, from that to UPSC IAS. Then now we will move on into the table of contents. Detailed analysis for let us begin the discussion of today's Hindu newspaper by first looking at the topics we are going to discuss. I have chosen 9 important articles from Delhi edition, and we have 2 articles for a detailed discussion. We have a very big development coming from Indian Parliament, and we are also picking up a topic from disaster management, and these 2 topics will be covered comprehensively, largely from a mains point of view, and we have several small articles that are more relevant for prelims exam. So let us cover these topics one by one. But before we begin, why don't you press the like button and share these videos with the other aspirants, and do subscribe to our channel, and also see the latest updates. Let us begin with the discussion by looking at this article from page number 1, which deals with the Indian polity. As you know, the monsoon session of the Indian Parliament was going on. It has just concluded. Right at the end of monsoon session, there has been a very big development. I can't stress how important this development is. Yesterday, Union Home Minister Amit Shah has tabled 3 new bills to completely reform and overhaul India's criminal justice system. Now, this has been a long-standing demand since the last 160 years. We have been governed by British era criminal laws, and because of the issues are associated with these criminal laws, there has been a long-standing demand to reform the criminal justice system in the country. So the government of India has introduced the 3 new bills to replace these British era colonial laws that defined our criminal justice system. The law which will be replaced includes the Indian Penal Code, or IPC, which was brought out in 1860 under the colonial government. This outdated British era law will be replaced with the Bharatiya Samhita. Then we have the CRPC, the Criminal Procedure Code of 1893. So even this is more than a century old, this law will be replaced with Bharatiya Nagarik Suraksha Sanhita. And then you have the Indian Evidence Act dating back to 1872, which is being sought to replaced by the Bharatiya Shaksha Sanhita. So these are the 3 new bills that were introduced by Union Home Minister Amit Shah in the Lok Sabha. And the government has said that new legislation, they will not just replace the British era law and remove the colonial hangover, but it will also provide for a transformative change in our criminal landscape. The government has said that the focus is on providing justice to the victims, delivering quick justice and the right punishment for the victims for the accused, as compared to focusing just on punishment and punitive justice. See, under British era colonial laws, the focus of criminal justice system largely based on punitive justice, that is just focused on excessive punishment to the accused. There was no victim-centric approach. There was no focus on human rights, no focus on sensitizing the police, no focus on increasing the effectiveness of police investigation. So all these changes are likely to brought out through these new laws in order to improve the delivery of justice and to protect the victims and provide for a sensitized police in the country, and to improve the police investigation and ensure that the accused get the right kind of punishment, which helps in the reformative justice instead of focusing on punitive justice, because in a modern civilized democracy, the focus of the criminal justice system should be on reforming the criminal right. The focus should not be just on delivering the strict punishments. The focus should be on delivering the right punishment quickly to do justice and to the victims and ensure that you provide an opportunity for reformation of the criminal to provide for reformative justice. This is what the government has said. The government has said the entire focus is to remove the colonial hangover, to do away with these outdated laws and provide for a transformative change in our criminal justice landscape. To prioritize the delivery of justice over punishment. Now let us examine this topic in slight detail. Let us talk about the history of criminal justice system. Let us look at the prevailing laws and issues associated with them, and then it becomes easier to understand the need for reforms. It becomes easier for you to understand why this is proposed change is such a big development. See, from 1860 till now, criminal justice in India has governed by this British era law that we just mentioned, the Indian Penal Code or IPC, Criminal Procedure Code, the CRPC, and Indian Evidence Act. These laws are completely outdated and they are not suited in the modern context. Of course, we have amended the law post independence and after independence. IPC, CRPC, Indian Evidence Act, they have been amended several times to account for modern crimes, to account for changes happening in the society, in economy, etc. But still, the very spirit of these laws, the core philosophy behind these laws, they are rooted in colonial thinking. If you look at the history of these three laws, it goes back to Machiavelli Court. Lord Machiavelli is considered as the chief architect of these three criminal laws in India. So you can imagine in what laws we are brought out when these laws were conceptualized by Lord Machiavelli. The focus was on focus of the British government was to stifle dissent, to snatch the fundamental democratic rights and oppress the Indian people in order to serve the interest of the crown. These laws were never meant for a democratic country. It was never meant for serving the citizen. Rather, it was meant to serve the interest of the colonial power. So, as a result, these laws were designed to favor the police. It was designed to give excess powers to the police so that the British colonial government can use force to curb the India's freedom struggle and to curb the descendants, to curb any mobilization of the forces that was trying to push the colonial government out. So the focus of these laws were designed to curb the basic rights like free speech. The focus was never to be victim friendly. The focus was never to deliver the right kind of punishment or to increase the effectiveness of police investigation. The entire focus of these laws was primarily focused on giving excessive power to the police force, which the colonial government could exploit to oppress the Indians. Suppose independence, where we continued these laws due to the lack of an alternative, and it has never been replaced since then. Of course, the law has been amended, I told you, but amendments were not enough to change the very spirit of the law. This is one of the biggest drawback. That is why many legal experts, they agree that these existing criminal laws are outdated and they are not suited for the modern civilized democracy. The other problem with these laws is that they are highly ineffective. They have been ineffective in tackling the crime, in maintaining public order. There are several provisions where the police are given tremendous power when it comes to arrest, search and seizure. And even when it comes to filing charge sheet, or even when it comes to holding the accused in custody for prolonged periods. So police are given extraordinary powers under these laws, which is often misused, leading to violation of human rights, a violation of fundamental rights, and it has led to harassment of common people by the police, which works in nexus with the ruling parties. In fact, many experts agree that these outdated British era criminal laws, they have enabled the politicization of our police forces. In fact, as a part of discussion on police reforms in India, one of the biggest recommendation was to remove these colonial era criminal laws and replace them with modern criminal justice system. Instead of protecting the innocents, the victims, and the punishing the guilty, these laws in a way enable the nexus between the politicians and the police officers, and it would eventually lead to the harassment of the people. When the victim would wait for prolonged period for justice, the law have been considered highly ineffective. Conviction rates are extremely low, whereas custodial torture, custodial deaths have been frequently reported without any accountability on the part of police. Essentially, it has enabled the police excesses. Along with that, we have seen under the criminal justice system that is prevalent currently, the number of pending cases is extraordinarily high, which has created a massive backlogs and a huge judiciary, and so also it created a very high under trial population in our jails and in our prisons. According to the data from economic survey, there are more than 3.5 crore criminal cases pending in the country. This has overburdened the judiciary, especially the lower courts. The district level and subordinate courts are highly overburdened due to the inefficiencies in the law. As a result, the accused who are arrested, sometimes they are arrested on flimsy charges without sufficient evidences, and they end up spending months and years in under trials, in jails under trials. As a result, India reports the world's highest under trial population according to National Crime Record Bureau. Almost 67% of those who are locked in prisons, they are under trials, which means they are still undergoing trials. They have not been convicted in a court of law. Such a high under trial population puts pressure on the prison system. It's a violation of their fundamental rights as well. Imagine if a majority of these accused, if they are not guilty, and eventually if the case fall apart due to lack of evidences and poor investigation, or in some cases to begin with it could be false charge brought up by the police to pin the blame on some innocent peoples. In many such cases, the accused who could have spent months and years in jail, their life, their career would have been ruined, and that is the direct breach of the fundamental right as well. So in many ways, the criminal justice system of the colonial era is contributing to the high patency of cases and high under trial population. It has continued the poor investigation abilities of our police forces. It does not provide for enough transparency and accountability in many ways. It has nurtured the corruption in our police force and promoted nexus between political outfits and police forces. It has enabled the politicization of our police forces, and it has also overburdened our police forces, right? The criminal justice system under these three laws which are currently in force, right, they have contributed to heavy burden workload on police forces, and it affects the deployment of modern tools and scientific investigative tools which could speed up the investigation and ensure the conviction. So no wonder conviction rates are extremely low under the criminal justice laws. This clearly explains why outdated laws have to go. They have to reformed, replaced with modern laws. Now let us say UPSC asks your mains question, where you are asked to examine the background of the and justify the need for reforming the criminal laws. So these points that I am going to present will be very important, and you can expect a question either in international relations and GS3, or maybe even under quality under GS2. So please note down the points through which we can justify the need for reforms in criminal laws. Now that you know the background, you know the deficiencies, we can easily argue as to why the criminal justice system has to be reformed. See, the criminal laws they represent the most direct link between the states and the citizens. In our day-to-day life, in your regular interaction with the state, the most interactions a person has with the state is usually with the police and the criminal justice system, right? Whether you are a part of a crime or not, whether you are a victim or not, right, you still come across the police force on a street, day in day and out, correct? You come across the various security situations in the place where you reside. You deal with the public order, law and order situations. You deal with various offenses, including criminal offenses. You will be reading about it. Your well-being is directly affected by rising the crime rate, in a given place. So citizens have a high level of exposure to the police and the criminal system. In fact, this represents the very face of the state for many people. See, most of us, we don't interact with the organs of the government on a regular basis. So in a given period of time, most of our interactions, at least the face of the state for us would be the police. And the criminal justice system, it's a very expression, the most apparent expression of the state and the link with the citizens. Now, if such a critical link is outdated, if it is enabling police exertion, the violation of fundamental rights, and now how will the citizen have faith in the state and in the constitution? If you look at the Naxalism in India, if you look at the origin of Naxalism, the spread of Maoist ideology, one of the reasons which contributed to the spread of Naxal ideology was police excess committed against farmers, peasants and tribal populations of the country. The criminal justice laws enabled the police forces to abuse their powers, which created resentment amongst farmers and tribal communities that contributed to large-scale support in Naxal corridor. Is that clear? So it's very, very essential to ensure that the criminal laws are fair, in line with your constitutional norms and principles, and it should match the norms of a modern civilized society. That's why I told you a criminal justice system should focus on reforming the criminal, not just merely delivering some punishments. It's not about delivering the strictest of punishments. If that was the case, then countries capital punishment, right, the countries with the brutal forms of punishments where the guilty, they are hanged publicly and they are beaten with stones, right? In such societies, crime would have been completely eradicated if punishments alone were to work, right? So what really helps in deterring crime is quick justice and swift justice, efficient investigation, quick arrest, solid investigation and quick efficient prosecutions, and this is what delivers quick justice to the victim, and the right amount of punishment and the proportionate punishment to the guilty. So in the modern civilized society, the very concept of criminal justice has undergone a very big change, providing brutal strict punishments, and they are of medieval era and they are a feature in authoritarian states. For example, if you look at new African countries, West African countries, Saudi Arabia for example, they are not democracies. They have a brutal form of punishment, and does not mean that they have eliminated crime. No crime keep taking place, and it's only innocent who get caught in between many times, and people who are not guilty are punished and given the strictest of punishment. Such a brutal punishment, they don't represent a modern civilized society. In a modern civilized democracy, what you need is a reformative justice, an opportunity to reform the criminal and better crimes through effective justice delivery. So this makes it very clear that we can't have the laws that are 160-year-old drafted by foreign colonial power, even though you have done enough amendments to update and suit them to the modern context. The spirit of the problem is colonial hangover is very apparent. As I told, it's directly contributing to the politicization of our police forces and misuse of police forces. So it is very critical to reform these laws and ensure that it accommodates all the changes that are happening in the society. Now, do you really think IPC, which was brought out in 1860s, or Indian Evidence Act brought out in 1800, will it account for modern economic crimes, and will it account for cyber crimes? Does have enough focus on women's safety? All these modern crimes which are coming up, which are connected with changes in technology, changes in economy, they are not accounted for. We have done we have accounted for them by amending those laws. For example, to account for cyber crimes through Information Technology Act, the Indian Penal Code and CRPC and the Indian Evidence Act were amended. When the IT Act was enacted in 2000, retrospectively the criminal laws were also amended to account for cyber crimes. But these the mere amendments are not enough. Just adding some provisions here is not enough, because the very spirit of law is outdated. It does not account for the changes that have happened in the society. It does not account for changes in technology and the changes in economy. So a criminal justice should the pace at which the society is evolving is that clear. Score of 1800s is clearly not suited for a 21st century. 21st criminals are more sophisticated and no one could be conceptualized these aspects of a couple of centuries ago. Right? So clearly Machiavelli scored the British era criminal justice system is outdated and it is out of place for a modern democratic India. There is no question, there is no doubt that these laws have to go. They have to be removed and replaced with new criminal laws that suit the Indian context. The state has an obligation to protect the society. The state has to make efficient laws to protect the basic rights of our citizens, including fundamental rights and human rights. Guaranteeing the fundamental rights, including right to life, personal liberties, and obligation in the state, and bringing out the criminal laws is a step in that regard. So, from many decades, there has been a strong demand within the India for reforming the criminal laws from political parties, from retired officers, experts, from judiciary, from the media, from civil society. There has been a very, very strong demand since India's independence to reform the criminal justice system. In fact, we have had several committees as well. In past issue has been discussed repeatedly as a part of the broader police reforms, but these changes are not taken place until now due to the lack of consultation and the lack of common thought between the central and state government, the lack of support from all the stakeholders. The process had never moved forward, because reforming the criminal laws is very controversial. It's not just about replacing these outdated laws, it's about what provisions are you going to include in the new criminal laws. How will you address the issues left behind by the colonial laws? How will you counter the colonial legacy? How will you desensitize? How will you promote sensitization? Our police forces, how will you make investigation more efficient? How will you protect the basic rights of the victims while delivering the right punishment to the accused, right? Addressing all these issues is always complicated. This marks a major legal reforms, and that's why the process has been many delay despite repeated attempts. It was a known fact that these laws are not exactly in line with the constitution. There were many bottlenecks affecting investigation, affecting justice, even leading to derailment of the justice. As you know, justice delayed is justice denied. So victims were at the receiving end of the inefficiency of these laws, and in general Indian polity was being affected, right from the state to police to criminals to the people, the victims, right? Everybody would who face the impact of these outdated colonial era criminal justice law. So without a doubt there is a strong need to reform them. There is no doubt that but the problem is, how will you reform, what changes to be introduced, and what would be the exact provisions to identify these areas. Few committees have been set up in the past. You should know about these committees. We have Malibat Committee, which was set up in the year 2000, was a part of the reforming the police system in criminal justice system. And the committee was headed by the Justice V.S. Malibat, a former higher Chief Justice of Karnataka and Kerala High Court. The Malibat Committee was tasked with reviewing the criminal justice law, the IPC and the Evidence Act, suggesting the reforms in order to modernize these laws. UIT committee suggested around 158 changes and submitted its report in 2003. The committee was of the it was the opinion that the existing laws they favor the accused and they did not adequately focus on delivering justice to the victims. While this was an important observation made by Maluma committee, the problem was the recommendation of the committee were very controversial. In the name of reforming the laws, the committee was suggesting giving excessive powers to the police in the name of making investigation efficient, delivery justice to the victim. Malibat committee had a more excessive power to the police forces. Naturally, this becomes very controversial. Critics pointed out that if Malibu committee recommendations are implemented, it would be even worse than the colonial era laws. Such strict provisions were recommended by the committee. Because of this controversy triggered and because of the strong opposition against it, most of these recommendations are never implemented. Most of the recommendation of Malibat committee were never saw the light. It was never implemented because of a strong opposition and the controversy triggered then in 2007. The mother of Menon committee, which was set up by Home Ministry to review the criminal justice system, submitted its report and suggested a national policy paper on criminal justice system, and it reviewed the criminal laws and came out with a new framework. But even these recommendations are not implemented due to lack of consensus between the political parties and the central and state governments. Then recently in 2020, the whole ministry appointed the Ranbir Singh committee, or the committee for reforms in criminal laws. And it appears that the recommendation of these committees might have been accepted in the new bills that the government had tabled. Of course, we don't have clarity here because the committee report was never placed in the public domain. It was never made public, and government hasn't told as of now whether the 3 new bills have been tabled yesterday in the Lok Sabha are they inspired by the Ranbir Singh committee recommendations. The government might have taken some recommendations on board, but there is no clarity there. There is no official confirmation regarding to what extent Ranbir Singh committee has influenced the 3 new bills that the government has drafted and tabled in the parliament. Few proposed reforms essentially covers the entire background of the topic. Now let us quickly go through some of the proposed reforms in the 3 new bills. See, of course, it is impossible to cover all the changes in one session. It is such a big topic, it is such a big development, right? You can't cover all the changes being proposed in one session of the course. There will be a plenty of articles in coming days. We will keep conducting a thorough analysis of 3 new bills. Right now, let us take a brief look of some of the important reforms that have been suggested. I will take you through some of the provisions explaining why it is important and stressing on the changes that are being brought about under the Bharati bill that has been proposed to replace the IPC, and the Indian Penal Code capital punishment for mob lynching has been provided as the maximum sentence. Is that clear? Mob lynching, even though few states brought out their own laws to deal with mob lynching from the central government, there was no legal provision that was brought out to deal with the mob lynching incidents. Especially last few years, there has been repeated mob lynching incidents where the vigilant groups crowd and mob they take laws in their own hand and lynch the targeted person by taking matters in their own hand, and eventually it leads to very death of the person. and quickly beaten and right. Whether he is innocent or guilty doesn't make it right. Even if he is a terrorist mob, have no right to lynch a person or kill that person, right? There is a legal system in place to punish the guilty, right? There is no excuse, no reason under any circumstance for the citizens to take mad law into their own hand. More lynching incidents like these have been gone through involving a communal angle or a thick angle or a linguistic angle, so this is not tolerable. Such few states brought out their own legal measures to tackle mob lynching. Is that clear? Now the central government is also proposing under the new law which replaces the IPC, and it provides capital punishment. The death penalty has as a maximum punishment for mob lynching. Is that clear? That is a very big change that has been proposed. Next, the three bills, they give a lot of priority for women, children, and this is a point that was stressed by the Home Minister as well with regard to women's safety, women's security, dealing with crimes like rape, molestation, etc. There is a lot of focus on these issues. In fact, an entire chapter has been dedicated under the IPC for women and children safety issues. So, one of the provisions suggested is 10-year jail for a man who has sexual intercourse with a woman on false promises of marriage and deception that this is if a woman were to deceive a woman into a sexual intercourse by taking a fake identities, by dumping them in the name of marriage, by promising marriage in future, and by dubbing them, then such a person would be punished with a maximum of 10-year jail term. Is that clear? See, of course, we are not saying whether these provisions are right or wrong. We are getting into the debate where that will come later, and please be aware that these are proposed changes by the government. Next, what are the biggest changes? The government is claiming that sedition law is being removed. I am sure many of you would have heard the sedition law, a very controversial law that was covered under section 124A of the Indian Penal Code. Sedition was essentially a colonial term that was introduced. It dealt with any disaffection against the state. If a person were to express any kind of disaffection or hate against the state through a speech, through writing, right, those people would be branded as seditious elements who are threatening the unity, identity, and sovereignty of the nation, right? Even any criticism against the government would be branded as sedition against the state, against the country itself, and they would be delivered strict punishments. This law was very controversial because quite often the sedition law was misused by the government by ruling parties to target the dissent, to target their critics and the opposition. So most of the times protesters, social activists, students, right, opposition leaders, they would have arrested under the seditious provisions, and it was a direct assault on right to speech and expression. It was seen as a direct assault of the fundamental rights. So there has been a long standing demand to repeal the sedition law. In fact, most of the modern democracies don't have sedition law in place, whereas India continues to retain this and attract a lot of controversy, and now the government is claiming, please note down this point, government is claiming that under the new bill sedition law is being repealed. I will tell you the reality later. When you come to last part, when we discuss the criticism, there will mention that the government has really done, but as of now the government is claiming the sedition law is being repealed. Next, the bill also defines for the first time major security related offences such as terrorism, organized crime, separatism, armed rebellion, and any challenges to the sovereignty of the nation. These provisions were never defined under the IPC before. As far as terrorism is concerned, the terrorism was covered under the unlawful activities prevention act, which is a primary anti-terror law in the country. These provisions will remain unchanged. These provisions related to terrorism under Unlawful Activities Prevention Act will not be touched, and we have other laws as well at the state level like MCOCA. Example, the Maharashtra state level, which deals with the organized crime. These laws will not be touched by the new bills, and those provisions will continue to remain. However, within the new laws, the terrorism, organized crime, separatism, armed rebellion, and any direct threat to sovereignty of the nation, they are being defined separately and being classified as criminal offences with strict punishment. The new bills also have a provision for putting absconding criminals on trial in a court in absentia and delivering the punishment to them in absentia. There are several criminal offenders who have run away from the countries, like for example Dood Ibrahim, fugitive economic offender, right? There are many terrorist criminals unwanted by India who are hiding abroad, not able to arrest and bring them back due to foreign jurisdictional issues. So such absconding criminals can be put on trial in absentia in a court and delivered punishment. Alright, so this provision also been proposed next coming back to focus on women's safety and security. In case of sexual violence against women, the new law mandates that video recording of the statement of survivor is compulsory to ensure that the right account is registered in the complaint, to ensure that there is no manipulation. The police take later the video statement of the survivor has to be taken. It is compulsory in any case. The sexual violence, be it rape, molestation, with regard to police. With regard to police, the new bill proposes that the police have to inform about the status of a complaint in 90 days. Once the complaint has been registered within 90 days, they have to update the court and the complaint the victim regarding the status of the investigation. They can't simply remain idle. They can't simply brush aside the case, ignore the case. Within 90 days, they have to give an update on the status of the complaint in the investigation. In a case that is punishable with more than 7 years of jail, if such a case has been withdrawn by the police due to lack of evidence, then before withdrawing, the police should mandatorily consult a victim. This again ensures that the police don't withdraw the case under pressure to favor the accused. Is that clear? In cases where the punishment is 7 years more, if such a case has to be withdrawn, police have to consult the victim first. For the first time, community service is being introduced in India for specific crimes. The concept of community service is largely a feature of Western criminal justice system. In US and European countries, you have a provision of community service, where for minors, criminal offences, for even minor civic offences, the punishment given is actually community service, where the person who has been held guilty, they are not put in jail, rather they are asked to serve the community in order to repent the crime that they have committed, the violation of law that they have committed, and this gives an opportunity to them to reform themselves, and they are asked to help orphan children or old age people, and they are asked to help in upkeep of the city, for example. So some community service will be assigned by the court to give an opportunity for the guilty to repent and reform, and that is the core of the reformative justice system. All right, so community service is being introduced for few minor crimes. Then with regard to filling a charge sheet, holding the accused in custody, the maximum time given is 180 days. This is very clearly mentioned that within 180 days the charge sheet has to be filed and the investigation has to be closed. Charge sheet has to be filed pushing the case towards the prosecution. So initially 90 days custody will be available. 90 days time will be given for filing the charge sheet, and this is 3 months of the time, and if required the additional time is needed for investigation. Police will have to approach the court for an extension, and they have to seek court's approval for extension of the period for another 90 days. So in total, police will get a maximum of 180 days for filing a charge sheet. Is that clear? When it comes to the custody of accused, the prevailing constitutional provision will apply under the Indian Constitution, and there are very clear-cut provisions. Even with regard to our legal provisions, we have enough safeguards to protect the accused from being unnecessarily thrown into the custody for prolonged periods without magisterial approval and extension. The accused cannot be held in custody beyond the given time frame. So these limits are being placed to check the excessive powers of the police and to prevent the excesses committed by the police forces. Next, when the cases are filed against government officials, government officials. If the complaint is registered against a civil servant, against an officer, or against a police officer, then if the complaint has to be registered, then the government has to give approval in the first place. That is a correct current norm. Right now time limit is being placed, a time limit of 120 days within which the government has to decide on the prosecution of the government official. When complaint are filed against the government official, investigation has happened, charge sheet is fine, but prosecution need to happen, government gets to grant approval. Right now there is no time limit, so that government to do, they try to pressure aside and the case by delaying the approval, and for prosecution they try to protect these officials. So going forward there will be a strict time limit of 120 days, and if they don't grant permission for prosecution, then if they don't decide on this within the time frame, don't decide on this within this time frame, it will be deemed that the government has permitted the prosecution of these government officials. Is that clear? Next few other minor changes. For example, it's mandatory for the police to carry out video recording of any search and seizure operation. When they are searching for evidence, seizing evidence is right, they have to document this video on to ensure that there is no manipulation, to ensure the false evidence is being planted. Forensic collection of evidence is compulsory in all crimes where the punishment is more than 7 years. Forensic science modern investigative tools have been deployed in the police. It's mandatory, or else the court will dismiss those cases, and the police officer will be designed in each police station, who will certify to the relatives of the accused regarding the well-being of the accused in the police custody. It means in every police station one police officer will be designed mandatorily, who will contact the relatives of the accused, who will stay in touch with them and keep updating them, informing them regarding the well-being of the accused who has been arrested. With this will help in tackling custodial torture, custodial deaths. It will help in preventing police excesses, and police will have a responsibility to inform the relatives regarding the well-being of the accused. Death sentence can be remitted only to a life sentence, and it can't be pardoned. Is that clear? Death sentence can be remitted only to the life sentence, nothing below that. See, pardoning powers under the Constitution, right, which is given to the President of India, that stands on its own. The pardoning powers with the President, that's a constitutional power given to the President. Even the governor has similar power with regard to pardon, revision, etc. But as far as reducing the sentence is concerned, that is remission. As far as remittance is concerned, death sentence can be reduced to maximum of life sentence, nothing below that. Life sentence can be remitted only up to 7 years, which means the person has to serve the 7 years in jail, and if the 7 years punishment has been delivered, then the waiver can be up to only 3 years. So no, the remission given to the guilty is being reduced, because in many cases under political pressure, government have limited sentences. Reduce the sentences and even releases them from custody. So to prevent such unfair remission, which is a derailment of justice, a clear guideline is being provided as far as remission is concerned. It also enables the provision of zero FIR. FIR is a trending concept. OFIR is a trending concept, especially because of the recent violation of violence in Manipur. 00 FIR is a feature where a citizen can register complaints at a police station, irrespective of this jurisdiction of the case, irrespective of where the police station is located, where the crime happened. The victim can register complaints at any police station under this provision known as zero FIR, and now it was an informal provision. Now the government is making it a formal legal provision through the proposed changes. So these are the big reforms being proposed by the government, and the bill have been pushed to a standing committee of the parliament for the thorough review in order to suggest any amendments or changes that might be necessary. Is that clear? So before the next session comes up, the bill has been pushed into of thorough review, which will be taken up by a parliamentary standing committee on home affairs. Now coming to the last part of the discussion. Now the legal experts, last part of the discussion, legal experts who have reviewed the initial provisions, they come out with some basic criticism. You can already identify some criticism again against the new bills that the government has proposed. For example, the government is claiming that sedition is being removed entirely, but according to the legal expert, this is not entirely true. According to the legal experts, if you look at the section 150 of the proposed Bharatiya bill, sedition has been indirectly introduced. Even though the word sedition is not being used, it deals with an offence where there is a threat to the sovereignty and integrity of the nation. In a way, sedition is being included in the different form without mentioning sedation by the word. The word sedation was been removed. That's it. Not just, but a similar provision exists under the Bharatiya bill of section 150, which would be replacement of the Indian Penal Code. So, as claimed by the government's addition, is not being entirely removed. It is being introduced through a different form. Next, the other point of criticism is that this is a true overhaul of criminal justice system. That is a question. The government is saying it's a major landmark reform, but the legal experts have a concern. Their concern is that even though changes are being proposed, many of the provisions have been simply copy pasted from previous laws existed provisions under the IPCC, IRPC and the Evidence Act, and have been directly taken forward without any changes as such. Now this is a major point of contention, because see, it's not just about change, it's not just about replacing the law, it's about the quality of the provisions being introduced. It's about the effectiveness of the provisions being introduced. So in this regard, many legal still have a concern. It requires a thorough review to be done. Because when it comes to arrest, when it comes to the right of the accused, when it comes to the victim friendly justice system, there are a lot of concerns that still remain, because right now the existing provisions, some of them are being directly taken forward without much changes. The other concern is with regard to the process that was employed in drafting the bill. In drafting the bill, it's not clear whether the government held enough consultation. There is no clarity on this. The government has not clarified whether Ranbir Singh committee recommendations were included. The government has not clarified as to which stakeholders have been consulted while drafting the bill. Is that clear? The government has just said that enough consultation has taken place within the government, but there is no clarity on this. There is no information in the public domain which shows the extent of consultation, and the government has government consulted the legal experts, has it consulted the civil society, has the civil state government, has it held a consultation with the Law Commission of India, with the judiciary. This is not clear. It's not clear whether Ranbir Singh committee recommendations have been incorporated or not. So of course there are some concerns, and this will come up very soon, because critics, the media, and even the judiciary will bring up these issues as one by one, and especially the parliamentary standing committee, which is going to thoroughly examine these bills, bring up the concern, and this will give an issue. We will discussing for a very long time. This is that clear? So these are the big developments related to the criminal justice system. That's all. Let us move on to the next article in the next video.